Well, here we are in the room, I think, that's designed by Robert Adam, a great Scottish architect.
Yes.
He's responsible for Kenwood House, among other places.
Ah.
Now, where's the switch for this thing? There we are, thanks. Okay, well, what we've got here is a chart for here and now. This is a map of the cosmos with London in the very centre. So everything above this line is the sky we can see, and everything below the line is the sky we can't see. You'll recognise the moon down here, and that dot surrounded by a circle is the sun. So at dawn today you would find the sun here on the chart, and then in a few hours' time you'll find it over here on the west. This is the east, this is the west. This is the sky up here. In a few hours' time the moon will come round here and come up into the sky. So the rest of the peculiar glyphs there represent the different planets from the moon outwards, Mercury, Venus, Mars and so on. For the sake of astrology we include the sun and the moon as part of the planets, astrological planets. So that's what it is. It's a very simple thing. It's a map of the sky.
Right, thank you. And the reason you can put it like that is that all the planets are roughly in the ecliptic. They're
all roughly in the plane.
Yes.
They don't go up and down. So it's a three-dimensional reality squeezed into two dimensions.
Right.
And the planets are going round this way, but the whole wheel is turning round that way, because the planets go round the sun, as we know, and the Earth turns once every 24 hours. So there's two contrary motions in the chart.
Right. And what's the meaning of star signs? What's the division of people up into 12 star signs? What does that
Well, when you put up a chart, you're not dividing anybody into anything. You're presenting a complete picture. If that were a chart of a person, a baby who'd just been born at 4 o'clock this afternoon, that would be their blueprint, if you like. That would be their starting point. That would be the chart which you looked at to get a few clues about their temperament, and which you referred to if you wanted to know what kind of astrological weather was in store for them.
But when you do a daily, well, not a daily, a weekly column,
Yes.
where you do segregate people into 12 categories,
Yes.
I just trying to get a feel where that fits on the chart.
Okay, well these things here are the actual, that's the zodiac, that's the backdrop of stars, fixed stars, against which the planets revolve. So the zodiac is a projection onto the sky that we find behind the ecliptic.
Right. And when you do a forecast for somebody based on their star sign, that's rather crude, I suppose, because
it's the shallow end of the pool, that's for certain.
Yeah.
So what you're looking at when you do a star sign forecast is where the sun is, where their birthday is. But of course, so you get 12 signs from that. But if you add in the moon can be in 12 different signs as well, then immediately you're into 144 types. Then if you add the ascendant, this point here, which is very important, then you've got 12 by 12 by 12, which is 1,728.
But I suppose the first 12 into the sun sign, that's pretty easy, is it? I mean, can you guess what my sun sign is by looking at me or by listening to me? Or
well, I know you're an Aries, Richard.
Oh, you've looked it up.
You're born late March, aren't you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So first of all, we could use that as a chart of an individual. Secondly, if you were asking a question of an astrologer, for example, you might want to know who's going to win the 4 o'clock race at Catterick, in which case you would look at that chart in a rather different way. And you would look at the signifier. Probably your signifier would be that moon down there. So you'd probably go for the favourite because the moon represents the public's choice. Or if you were an economist, you'd be looking at the most dominant thing of the year, which is the clash between this planet, Neptune, and that planet over there, which is Saturn. Now that's a clash that only happens every 33 years. So we try to find what the meaning of that particular cycle is. Because Neptune represents oil and gas, and Saturn represents restriction, we would be finding, this is probably a year when there's not going to be enough oil and gas to go around. So the price of those commodities would go up. So that's the way a financial economist would look at the charts.
So, but by the fact that Neptune and Saturn are at opposite sides, is that?
Yes.
Is that, oh, I see, okay.
That's significant
Yes.
for us. It's the patterns that the planets make, the oppositions and the conjunctions, are important.
Yes.
So what's opposite what?
Yes. But when you said that when looking for who's going to win the 4 o'clock race, you look at the moon, what tells you there to look at the moon? I didn't really understand that, because you could
Well, that's a technique. I mean, ideally you would look at the 5th house. I mean, I'm not a gambler. I don't use astrology for horse racing.
So you're not going to tell me who's going to win the race?
You'd look for a horse that had something to do with Taurus, probably. So a horse with a name that was redolent.
Okay.
So that's just an example. I don't,
Yes.
I'm just pointing the different ways astrologers use the chart. You could ask a question. You could say, who has stolen my money? And an astrologer would go, well, here's the chart for the time you asked the question, and would read it off using their particular techniques.
Read it off as though, you mean they get it right?
Well, they should get it right, shouldn't they?
I mean, do you believe that?
I can't do that, but
No.
I know people who can.
I see. Okay.
Which planets would be strongest in that chart? The moon would be strong because it's in a sign where it likes to be.
Oh, okay, you didn't say that. All
Yeah.
right. So what sign is it in there?
It's in Taurus.
The moon likes to be in Taurus, so
Yes.
when the moon's in Taurus, you take note of the moon.
The moon would be a stronger planet. It
Yes.
would have more dignity. It depends entirely what question you are asking of the chart, you see. Certain planets have more strength, quote unquote, if they are in a particular sign.
And that varies from day to day as they move from one sign to another.
It does. And if I was doing a horoscope, and if I was writing a forecast for Aries, for example, and here's Aries here, this little ram's horn here. So I'd be thinking, well, what's going on with them? Well, opposite Aries at here is 2 degrees of Libra is Mars. So you think, well, Aries are going to have Mars opposite them this week. So the chances are they will encounter somebody with whom they're going to have some kind of dispute. They're going to be encountering people who are probably hostile to their views, or somebody who winds them up. So you might like to interpret it that way.
Okay. And similarly, if what's another sign? What about that?
This?
Yes, that one there.
That's Aquarius.
Aquarius, and that's opposite
Leo.
Leo. So what would you read from that?
Well, Saturn is in Leo all year, so Aquarians are not going to have the easiest ride of their lives.
Right.
Saturn's a very strong signifier.
Signifier of things not being easy.
Of difficulty,
Yes. Okay.
of paucity, hard work, and dealing with property, all the things that Saturn governs. So we're ascribing to each of those planets a different function, a different archetype.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Are you the Observer's first astrology correspondent?
Yes, I think so.
And how long ago did they start?
About 10 years ago.
About 10 years. Was there a bit of a fuss when that happened? I mean, I think I vaguely remember that astrology had been going on the sort of tabloid newspapers, but wasn't there a bit of a fuss when the Observer first started?
Not initially, because the column I first wrote was a column about astrology rather than sun sign forecasts. But not everybody liked the sun sign forecasts going in there. That's true.
When did that start?
6 years ago.
Okay. I remember that one of the sort of quality papers did it as a bit of a joke when they first started. They sort of...
A couple of them still do it as a joke.
Oh, do they?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But you don't see it as a joke. You take it seriously.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Could you tell me something about the theory of it? Let's, for the moment, stick to sun sign,
Okay.
which is what you do. How does that work?
Well, I look at the chart for the week, I look at the major planetary events of the week, and I do a forecast on the basis of that.
Okay. And it's one forecast for each of the 12 sun signs?
Yes.
Which means that there's supposed to be something in common between everybody born between certain days.
Yes.
And do you feel convinced that there is something, that all Librans have something in common and all Arians have something in common, etc.?
My observation is that sun signs are remarkably descriptive.
Right, okay.
Yes.
What do you think, do you think there's an actual physical influence of the planets that somehow beams down and influences us, people?
I think it's very hard to see that. I think if you try to understand astrology as a causal agent,
right,
I think that's hard to imagine how that would happen. I think you have to look at the planets as signifiers.
Right.
And if there is a causal influence, it obviously isn't anything that accords with science as we know it.
Okay. So, if I could get that right, there is no causal influence of the planets on the person. What there is, in your view, is that people who are born in certain parts of the year have something in common for whatever reason. It might have nothing to do with the stars or the planets. It might be, I don't know, something to do with being born in the autumn or being born in the spring or something of that sort. Is that likely?
Yeah.
Mm. But in that case, why go to all that stuff about Saturn being the symbol of so-and-so and Mars being the symbol of something else? And I mean, if it's just that people born in the end of March have something in common due to their being born in the end of March,
yes,
like in the spring, then saying that Saturn has moved into Aquarius or something wouldn't mean anything, would it? I mean,
well, the positions of the planets do tell us. As astrologers, we believe that they signify, they're articulating. For me, astrology is as a language, it's a symbolic language, and it's one that articulates very well. It articulates quite profoundly at times. Other times, it seems to be struck dumb.
yeah.
But I think that when you look at the movement of Saturn around the zodiac, it's a very strong signifier of what's going on in individual lives.
So that rather contradicts what we seemed to agree earlier, that it's just something about the time of year when you're born, is it?
Well, I don't know about just something about the time of year you were born. I think where the sun is in the sky is something that, you know, is like a tribal marking, if you wish.
Right. Doesn't that suggest that there must be some causal emanation coming from the planets in order for that to be true?
It suggests that, and then if you look for a causal device, then you can. I think today's science has some suggestions. You know, if you look at the subatomic physics of people like Bohr, or you know, they have this idea of the cosmos as a place in which responds to us. It's not this cold, empty place that's been bequeathed to us by science. It's a more interactive place, and I think you can see
that interaction happens. I mean, interaction between people and the cosmos.
Yeah, I think so.
So some radiation from people, some energy from people flows out to the cosmos or something. Is that what happens?
Yes, I think energy is reciprocated in some mysterious way.
Yes. But by what physical means might that happen?
I don't know. I think it's a deep, dark mystery at the minute.
Yes.
As you know, there are many mysteries that even science can't understand.
Indeed, there are. Yes.
So if we look at this thing called dark matter, which the astronomers keep on about, the universe is apparently full of dark matter, but it's never been observed, and they can't say quite what the function is. It's inferred, as they say.
Yeah.
So I think when they come up with an answer for dark matter, they'll probably have the causal.
Yes.
You know.
I mean, things like dark matter, things like Niels Bohr and and quantum theory and so on you were talking about earlier, these are certainly, there are mysteries about them. They're very wonderful mysteries. They're deeply mysterious and deeply beautiful, actually.
Yes, I agree.
Don't you think there's something a bit demeaning about going from there to, I don't know, predicting who's going to win a horse race or something? I mean, why would the heavens in all their grandeur care about who's going to win a horse race?
Good question. How could that possibly work? There is a sense in which the universe seems to accord. It seems to run on laws that are signified by the planets, by astrology. Why that should be, I don't know.
I mean, the universe runs on laws which physicists are busy trying to find, and,
Yes.
and maybe one day they will find them.
Yes.
But do you see what I'm getting at when I say there's something a bit almost undignified about importing these trite, mundane, day-to-day forecasts about horse races and whether you're going to have a good day at the office and things like that?
Well, they're not trite if they are happening to you.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to build a bridge, Richard, you need a physicist. You need somebody with a good understanding of the laws of engineering. Otherwise, that bridge is going to collapse.
That's true.
But when that same engineer goes home and goes back to a marriage that's on the rocks, the laws of physics are of no use whatsoever, are they? You're then into a different paradigm, an irrational paradigm, because love, which allegedly makes the world go round, you may think otherwise, is not a rational thing. It's an irrational thing.
It is. So why then are you trying to talk about things like dark matter and quantum theory and...
Because you asked me if there was a physical explanation of how astrology works, and I don't think at the minute there is.
Yes.
But I think that quantum physics and the idea of the implicate and explicate order, for example, which one of them came up with, one of Einstein's compatriots, I can't remember his name, but he's the, these ideas are useful for understanding how astrology might work.
Life is human life, the part which you described as irrational, is of course highly complicated, and you never know what's going to happen because there are so many things going on. And so trying to forecast the future is always difficult, and one can really only do it on a very, very probabilistic basis. You can say, well, roughly speaking, it's quite likely that, I don't know, if you are a bad driver or you drive a fast car, you may be a bit more likely than the average to be killed. But you're trying to use principles, arcane principles going back a very long way, to make that kind of forecast. And it makes me feel that since life is so unpredictable, and people are gullible, people are quite ready to be fooled, almost anything which is a randomizing device, whether it's tarot cards or whether it's throwing a dice or whether it's tea leaves or whether it's looking at complicated interactions between planets and constellations, almost anything would do to produce the kind of randomizing effect which is going to fool people.
Well, randomizing effect is a funny way to put it to me. Because there's nothing random about what happens in the heavens. But I think there is a divinatory side of astrology. I think there is a side of astrology which is divination. And in that sense, it doesn't matter which device you use, because the thing that's doing the intuition, the thing that's doing the divination, is always the person.
Yeah, right.
Ultimately.
Yes.
I think what's different about astrology is that the planets are up there and we know their courses and we know what they do.
Yes, but you don't think they're actually having any causal influence on us?
Well, the moon obviously does.
In what way?
Well, if you go down to any A&E departments, they'll tell you that there's more people come in on a full moon.
Sure.
You know, and obviously the lunar cycle and the menstrual cycle accord, and I think there's lots of gardeners.
I mean, the moon has enormous effects via the tides, for example.
So apart from the moon, it's hard to see how any of those planets acts on us directly. I don't see that. I think it's all...
Some of your colleagues do, don't they? Some of your colleagues do think there's some direct influence.
No one I know. Percy Seymour, I think, does. I don't. That's not the way I understand astrology to work.
Yes. I still haven't quite got the way you do understand it. I thought I was onto something when I suggested something about the time of year you were born, but you seem to backtrack from that.
The time of year you were born, well, that's marked off by the sun, isn't it? I mean, when we're looking at a horoscope, when we're looking at a map of the heavens, the sun is only one factor.
Yeah.
You know, there's lots of factors. The moon is also a very important signifier, as is the ascendant.
There was a joke, a cartoon, which I saw a couple of years ago, where there was a newsreader saying, in a remarkable triumph for the science of astrology, everybody born under the sign of Taurus was today run over by an egg lorry. Now, obviously, I don't expect you to make accurate and specific forecasts like that, because obviously you'd be wrong. But what does strike me when reading sun sign forecasts is how very bland they are, how very general. Yeah. They sort of have the feel that somebody's going to find something in everything you say. Is there anything in that, do you think?
I think what you're doing when you write a sun sign forecast is you're providing a moment when people think about their lives in a more contemplative way. And you're using whatever signifiers you can to give them some information. And I think inevitably there's an element of a riddle about it. You know, like the Delphic Oracle, you end up speaking in a koan, something that people are going to interpret how they wish to. So I think there is an element of that in there.
Astrologers never seem to be very good at forecasting major events like earthquakes or 9/11 or something like that.
That's not true.
Well, I mean,
astrologers make accurate forecasts all the time.
Yeah.
It's just that most people aren't reading them.
Well, I mean, every time a big event like 9/11 happens,
yes.
The Skeptical Inquirer does an analysis of the astrological predictions for that day, and they never get it. I mean, it's
well,
always...
9/11 was got by several people. I mean, astrologers around the world looked at the pattern that was in the sky that year and saw Pluto opposite Saturn, and that particular cycle is often associated with terrorist attacks.
Yeah.
It's usually a nasty thing that happens when you have those two planets opposite.
Yeah.
So actually they did predict.
I suppose if you've got enough astrologers, one or two of them are bound to get it, but was there any attempt to look at, I mean, did you get 9/11, for example?
No, I didn't predict 9/11, but I predicted a year when terrorism would be rife.
Yes.
When the spectre of terrorism would be...
I think I could probably predict
You could probably predict that, yes.
Yeah. James Randi, who's a well-known skeptic,
yes.
when he was a young man, was once employed as an astrologer on a Canadian newspaper.
Yes.
And his method was to take the forecasts of other astrologers with a pair of scissors, scramble them at random, and put them in for, so that you know, Libra got Taurus's forecast, etc., every day. And what struck him was how every day these randomized forecasts were published. And every day he was congratulated on how accurate he was by people who... I mean, that's what I'm saying, that when you read these things, what you are saying, oh yeah, that's me, that's wonderful, terrific. Isn't that really what you're playing on?
No. I mean, if you're going to just do something at random, like James Randi, I mean, that just shows how little integrity he has, really, to me.
Well, it worked, though, didn't it? I mean, people
Well, I don't know
fooled.
if it worked. Did people really like it, or did he say that? I don't know.
I only read his account, but
yes.
I did find it very believable, having read other astrologers. I sort of looked down the column, and every time I said, oh, yes, that could be me, that could be me, that could be me.
Well, I would be disappointed if that were the case when I wrote 12 different sun signs. I would be disappointed if what I'm telling Virgo applied to Pisces.
Yes. So, I mean, presumably we could, I haven't thought of it before, we could devise a little experiment where we take your forecasts and then give some of them straight, give some of them randomized, sometimes give Virgo the Pisces forecast, etc., and then ask people how accurate they were.
Yes, that would be a perverse thing to do, wouldn't it?
It would be, yes, but I mean, wouldn't that be a good test?
A test of what?
Well, how accurate you are. Suppose
I'm not sure it would, no.
Why not?
Well, you have liberty to try it.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm curious to know why you don't think it would be a good test.
What would you be trying to prove? What would be your motive in all this?
The so-called null hypothesis, the thing we're trying to disprove, would be that you're exactly as good as random. In other words, if you were to do the Randi experiment of taking your forecasts, if we were to take your forecasts, scramble them at random.
Who would you get to read them?
I'm a sample of people drawn in from the street, presumably. I mean, yes, anybody who doesn't have prior knowledge of what you're forecast for that day was. But if we say took your forecast for last Sunday,
Yes.
and we got a room full of 100 people,
Yes.
and we gave everybody in that 100 people 12 sun sign forecasts and didn't tell them which was which.
Right.
And you ask each person to pick out the one that most fitted them, that most
Right.
fitted what happened to them last Sunday. Now you presumably would have to bet that most of them would get it right, wouldn't you?
No, I think that your intention there is mischief, and I think what you'd then get back was mischief.
Why would my intention have anything to do with it?
I think intention always has something to do with it.
Well, my intention would not be mischief. My intention would be experimental test,
Okay.
Scientific test.
Well,
but even if it was mischief, how could that possibly influence it?
I think it does influence it. I think whenever you do things with astrology, intentions are strong.
Right. So an experimental test that actually was designed only to try to rule out randomness,
Yeah,
that would be mischievous enough to mess it up, would it?
probably, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're in a kind of no-lose situation then, aren't you?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, when people have tested astrology before, you know, they've got results. It isn't as if it's never been proven.
No, but I'm offering you a test and you seem not to be keen on it.
I'm not keen on it because, I don't mind. If you want to go ahead and try it, see what happens. I'm curious.
I'd have thought you'd be eager. I mean, I'd have thought you'd want it to be done.
Well,
but if you believe it, you presumably would believe it would produce positive results.
I'll tell you one reason I don't think that, Richard, is because when I write for my readers, for me it's part of an ongoing dialogue. And sometimes you see things that are in the stars and you think, I can't tell them this week after week. I can't go through August telling them, look, it's very tough, you're going to have to hang on till September. So I would modify what I said on one of those weeks. But for me, it's an ongoing dialogue. It's giving people ongoing information. So whether that's the right week for that particular sign to, I'm not sure.
Well, that might have to come out in the wash. That's a
It might have to
possibility.
come out in the wash.
Yes. There's another nice story of a journalist who drew the short straw one week and was told to go away and do the astrology column.
Yeah.
And he said, all the sorrows of yesteryear are as nothing compared to what will happen to you today. And the phone lines were jammed and there were suicides and all sorts of terrible things happened.
It's a really irresponsible thing to do, yeah? You can't tell people that. That's nasty.
Could you tell me something about the historical origins of astrology?
Well, astrology as we know it is probably conceived in Ptolemaic Egypt, round about the 1st century AD, drawing on a number of different sources from Egypt, from Babylonia, from Greece and so on.
Right. And at that time, the signs of the zodiac were identified. What else? At that time, at least Ptolemy himself thought. Well, is it the same Ptolemy? I don't know
Yes.
what you're talking about there.
Yes.
Thought that these sort of complicated epicycles and things. You still use that system, or how does that sort of fit in with the ancient system?
Well, the ancient system is, I suppose, the astrology that came out of Greece, Hellenistic astrology, is pretty much still what we use, I would say.
Right. Now, tell me, what is the precession of the equinoxes?
Well, as you know, the Earth doesn't revolve on a completely level axis. It's got a little twist, rather like a top that's spinning.
Yeah.
So the top of the globe is always spinning around like this,
Right.
but it takes 25,000 years
Yes.
to conclude. So as a result, every 72 years, the zodiac goes backwards 1 degree.
Right. And do you take account of that in your sun sign forecasts?
Yes.
Yeah. How do you do that?
Well, there are 2 zodiacs in use. One is by the Vedic people, which is the sidereal zodiac, and one is what we use, which is the tropical zodiac. So we are measuring off where the planets are from the equinox on March 21st.
Right.
and going around the ecliptic that way.
So do you take account of the present position of the constellations or the position that they used to be in when the system was
We
devised?
measure the constellations from 0 degrees Aries, so that's where we measure them from. But that's not where they are.
No.
So we're all 17 degrees out.
Right. And does that matter?
Doesn't matter to me.
No.
Matters to the Vedic astrologers.
Yes.
The-
And I take it doesn't matter to you because you don't think the constellations are having any influence anyway, and so it doesn't matter which constellation is where.
It's the planets that are most important.
Why is that?
The planets are in the language of astrology, the planets are the verbs. They're
Because
the
they have
ones
no
that are doing
influence.
anything.
You said they had no influence.
Well, I said they signify.
Right.
They're the ones that are actively telling us things.
Okay. What about the relationship between astrology and astronomy, which obviously moves on in a way that astrology, I suppose, doesn't? Probably like me, you're immensely inspired by the grandeur of the universe as it's now understood. I mean, the fact that this is just one galaxy, huge as it is, among many others. Are you sort of inspired by the poetry of that, by the wonder of the universe?
I'm inspired by the poetry of the stars and by poetry itself, which has often drawn on astrology for inspiration. You know, it's been consistently popular among English poets. That's one reason I became interested.
Right.
I mean, astrology is something that has spoken to many of your heroes. I mean, Galileo was a very keen astrologer. Johannes Kepler was a keen astrologer.
Yes, I'm sure.
So it obviously spoke to them.
Yes, and science moves on. And what about changes in science? What about if astronomers decide that Pluto is not a planet anymore? That doesn't worry you, presumably.
Well, what 400 astronomers say at the end of a conference involving 10,000 of them is not a huge issue. No, I don't think so.
And I should have thought it should make no difference at all, because whether or not it's called a planet, I mean, if it's a signifier or if it has a causal influence, it can still have that same influence one way or the other.
That's right. It's still a divine body. It's a celestial body. It's a heavenly body.
Yes. And what about the new one? I've forgotten what it's called. Xena.
I think it's going to be very hard to integrate anything out there in the Kuiper belt beyond Pluto. And when you're talking about Xena, I mean, Xena's at 43 degrees off the ecliptic.
Right.
I mean, it's just not really usable. And it takes so long to go around the sun that it's hard to see what use it would be practically. I mean, there are all kinds of things, bits of orbiting gravel, and some astrologers use them. Some astrologers use small asteroids. Most of us don't. We just use the major planets. But, you know, it's up for grabs. If you want to use it, you can.
Let me come back to this idea of a signifier.
Yes.
So they don't have any causal influence. Presumably the things that actually do cause us to be the way we are and cause things to happen are things like our physiology, our hormones, our upbringing, our genetics. These are all very, very complicated and to some extent understood. You've agreed that the planets can have no influence on those things. I don't even understand how they could possibly be signifiers. I mean, how could the rise of Saturn possibly be a signifier for something that's going on physiologically in a person's body, or something that's going on in terms of the weather, or any of the other things that astrologers forecast? These are very complicated. They're due to very different things. There are earthquakes, there are volcanoes, there are storms, there are tornadoes, there are human emotions. All these things are very, very complicated, influenced by many, many things. What on earth has the rise of Saturn or the setting of Mars got to do with it?
Where are emotions in genes? Can you find them? Can you locate them?
That's the wrong way to put it. I mean, emotions are in brains, and brains are the embryology of brains is influenced by genes, and that's well established and easy to understand in principle.
Yes.
But the position of planets in the
how
signs
would
of
it
the
work?
zodiac.
This is what you keep coming back to ask me. How could it
How would it
possibly
work?
work?
Yes.
And I've told you, I don't know. It's a deep, dark mystery.
Yeah. Okay. I accept that it's a mystery, and one doesn't have to be able to solve all mysteries, but there has to be some kind of
Does
reason
it work?
Does it work, exactly? What is the... I mean, why are you so convinced that it works?
I've seen it work.
Well, you've seen anecdotal evidence that it works.
I've seen it work for me, Richard.
Yeah, I know
I've
you
seen
have.
it work in people's lives.
I know you have.
And then this is always the problem for the sceptics of any sort, isn't it? They'll say, well, actually, no, you weren't cured by a homeopathic remedy. You just thought you were.
Let me have one more go at explaining why that experiment I proposed to you, that you proved is important for precisely this reason.
All right.
Everybody thinks it works, not everybody. Most people thinks it works for them. And I've offered you a perfectly plausible explanation, which is that it's bland and general and it's got something for everybody. Now, you can disprove that. Once and for all, you can disprove that by doing a randomized trial. That's what randomized trials are for. They are to answer specifically that criticism, which is that everybody will find something in probably every one of the 12 signs on any one day. Precisely the correct experiment to do in order to eliminate that is to randomize and then test whether it still works. And maybe I was wrong to suggest that the way to do it would be to offer people a choice and pick the one that's theirs. But some sort of choice involving randomizing. You could perhaps use another astrologer to come along and say, yes, something like that. Anything that randomizes first and then tests, rather than relies upon people's anecdotal, subjective judgment, saying, oh yeah, that's me, because that is subjective, and that's so easy.
What's wrong with subjective judgment? What's wrong with people saying, he keeps getting it right, or she keeps getting it right?
What's wrong with it is that if it's true that they would say it, even if the sun signs were randomized, and that's my proposition.
Yeah.
That's what you've got to disprove. My proposition is that that's exactly what they would say if you randomized it. Now, if that's true, that demonstrates that you're doing absolutely nothing, and you can disprove that.
Well, I'm not doing absolutely nothing, Richard. I'm writing a forecast each week, and that's something that I think the readers like.
I've explained a possible hypothesis for why they like it, and the hypothesis is that they would like it.
Is that it's meaningless?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I'm not going to agree that it is meaningless.
No, you're not. I'm not expecting you to agree. But you could disprove what I'm saying with a simple
I don't know if
experiment.
I can. I don't think I can disprove what you're saying to your satisfaction.
You could if you did that experiment.
Well, feel free.
Yeah, but you're not interested, are you?
Really.
No. Suppose I did it and showed that you really were onto something. What about then?
Be nice, wouldn't it?
I'd have thought you'd be eager. I mean, I'd have thought you'd really... See, the fact that you're not makes me think you don't really, in your heart of hearts, believe it. I don't think you really are prepared to put your reputation on the line.
I just don't believe in the experiment, Richard. It's that simple.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. That's fine. Oh, no, okay. Would you agree to any experiment on astrology?
There are lots of experiments that have been conducted on astrology. I mean, there was the famous Michel Gauquelin experiment where they did the 950 sportsmen and found that Mars had a significant role in their birth charts. But of course that was then trashed by the psychops, by the skeptics, and the only way they could disprove it was by tampering with the data. So it doesn't matter what people do, it's never good enough.
Well, in the Gauquelin experiment, as I remember it, it was compatible with something about the month you were born rather than anything to do with...
No, it was the position of Mars in the individual horoscope. So it was all based on timed horoscopes.
Yes, okay. And what was the end result of that? I mean, what was the upshot of the Gauquelin controversy? Because I've forgotten what the details were now.
Well, the upshot of it was that the psychops tried to rubbish it, and then the whole thing got lost in the miasma of counter-accusation, and one or two of the physicists involved resigned in disgust and said, look, you can't fiddle data, that's not on.
Right.
Well, Richard, you have this thing you've invented called memes, which, if I understand it correctly, is a kind of cultural gene.
Yeah.
Well, one would have to say that the astrology meme has been extraordinarily successful it's evolved, it's multiplied, it's spread. Now, for it to do that, it must presumably have a very vigorous quality to it. And I think, you know, its longevity is proof that there's something there.
Okay, so something that spreads, something that's popular, something that lasts, that's a sufficient guarantee of its success? Well, that's one way of measuring success. I mean, another way of measuring success is to ask if it's true, and it's not difficult to do that actually. I mean, I offered you a very simple experiment. I want to do much simpler ones than that. But sheer popularity poll success, no question. Actually, it is a recent revival, isn't it? It hasn't been. I mean, sun sign astrology has been revived relatively recently.
Sun sign astrology, I think, is astrology's response to the modern age, you know, to the age of mass communication. And I suspect that it's about to be superseded now that we have the web, because you can go onto the web and you can have your horoscope cast for nothing, and they will give you readings from your personalised horoscope. The kind of information that a few hundred years ago was only available to the Duke of Tuscany or even more recently to the President of the United States.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
That anybody who doesn't subscribe to Darwinist ideas is always described as a charlatan. And there is this idea that everybody is doing things for the basest of motives, and science is always presented as this pure, clear, noble enterprise, whereas in fact, as we know, scientists are no less likely to be corrupt than anybody else, and frequently have been.
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure about whether Darwinism is relevant. I haven't asked you about that, and I mean, are you telling me you don't believe in Darwinism?
No, but okay. I'm saying, let's just say hard hat science.
Yes, okay. The thing about scientists being no better than anybody else, I think that's probably true of scientists as individuals. I mean, I think that, you know, scientists are fallible human beings. There is, however, one difference, which is that the whole scientific enterprise is founded on honesty. And so even if individual scientists occasionally are caught with their pants down, which they are, I mean, sometimes they do fiddle their figures, the whole scientific enterprise is geared to catching that sort of thing. The idea of peer review, the idea of experiments having to be repeated by other people. So if somebody cheats, they get found out, and it's part of the sort of ideology of science that cheating is a very, very bad sin indeed.
Yes.
Which is probably not true of other professions. I mean, there are other professions where advocacy, for example, is the great virtue. And if a great lawyer, for example, can get away with persuading a jury of something highly implausible in the teeth of evidence, then somehow he becomes a hero. Science actually is very much opposed to that kind of thing.
But there are lots of research scientists working for rapacious multinationals.
There certainly are, and these things do happen. But the scientific methodology is specifically geared towards that not happening. Part of what, I mean, I'm not suggesting any dishonesty in when I was suggesting the experiment that we should do to test what you do, but the idea of that kind of thing is not to test for dishonesty, it's to test for subjective bias, which the most honest person in the world can have.
And you also suggested in your book that astrologers are somehow all in it for the money. All I can say to that is anybody who's after a lot of money would be very ill-advised to go into astrology.
I won't ask what you're paid.
Where 7 people make a lot of money and, you know, another 80 struggle by and everybody else is broke.
Yes, okay, well I won't probe into that. But I want to come back to this thing about the scientific method, because I think it's terribly important that because human individuals are fallible, because human individuals cheat, and because they are influenced by bias, I'm now talking about not deliberate cheating, but non-deliberate cheating. In medical trials, for example, the double-blind control test, where you have a bottle of drug and a bottle of control, and you give the drug to 100 patients and the control to 100 patients. The reason why that's done double blind, the reason why neither the patients nor the nurses nor the doctors know which is the experimental bottle and which is the control bottle, is that with the best will in the world, people can be swayed by all sorts of things. I mean, if one pill is pink and one is black, then it's probably going to be more effective. So, scientific method is geared not only to remove cheats, which it is, but also to remove inadvertent, best will in the world, innocent bias.
Yes.
And that's what that was the sole purpose of my suggested experiment,
Okay.
was to remove innocent bias.
Yes. Science, broadly speaking, doesn't do philosophy any longer. It used to. It doesn't really offer anyone a way to live their lives any longer, I don't think. Which is, I think, one of the weaknesses of it, that everything has become so impersonal, so cold and random, which is what people complain about, that meaning's been stripped out of life by science.
Well, in one sense, maybe, but there's a lot of meaning put in by science. I mean, we
Yeah.
now understand all sorts of things about
do.
where we come from and,
Yeah.
and how we work and things. So there's an awful lot of meaning being put back in. As for whether meaning's taken out, I think that's up to the individual. I think, I mean, individual people live their lives according to all sorts of different things. I mean, warm human relationships and
That's, I think,
and
the
music
motor for most life on the planet, isn't it?
I think that's probably true.
Reproduction and,
Yeah.
you know,
But there's
love,
nothing,
for want of a better word.
But I mean, science doesn't go against that. I mean, that's,
No.
science is just a different, is one of the activities that people indulge in, which actually can be deeply satisfying
Yes.
personally and
And
can
useful.
give rise to, and useful. And it can give rise to all sorts of personal relationships between scientists collaborating and
Yes.
things. It's a human enterprise like any other,
Yes.
but it has the additional benefit of teaching us something about the universe and the world and ourselves, which we wouldn't otherwise have known. And before science came along, we got positively wrong. And so I don't think you can, as it were, blame science for a lack of meaning or a lack of sensitivity or personal fulfillment or anything like that. It's actually rather the reverse, I think. Is astrology a faith-based system, or have you had your doubts?
Astrology is a philosophical system. Is it faith-based? Well, being old, it probably has belief in a higher power of some sort, yes. It leans toward the divine and the sacred, words which I know you don't like very much.
But, well, you haven't used them at all during our discussion, so I don't see this relevant, really.
I think you know, someone said, O'Neill, you're a very sceptical kind of astrologer. And I think that's a fair comment, because I think, you know, it's one among many factors to me. It's a clue. You know, but I don't adhere to the atheist point of view, the scientific point of view, that it's all random, it's all meaningless, there's no real purpose, it's all been a big accident how we've arrived here. I couldn't think that.
No, I don't either.
And nor do most people.
No.
Most people have a belief in, you know, emotion, intuition, the irrational side of life, if you want.
Well, it's okay if you admit that. Yeah.